The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the city wrapped in a quiet silver glow. Tiny droplets clung to the branches of maple trees, and the empty streets reflected the pale colors of a waking sky. It was the kind of morning that carried memories more easily than sound, where even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the peace. Daniel Carter had already been awake for hours. Before reporting to his maintenance job, he followed the same ritual he had kept for nearly 5 years. He pushed an old bicycle along the narrow path leading into Maplewood Park, a place where the city seemed to forget its own noise. His toolbox hung from the handlebars, and a small paper bag rested in the front basket. Inside the bag were 2 homemade sandwiches. One was for him. The other belonged to his 9-year-old daughter, Lily, who would soon meet him before school for their Friday breakfast beneath the old willow tree. Daniel paused beside a weathered wooden bench overlooking the pond. One of its legs had loosened again after last week's storm. Kneeling quietly, he tightened the bolts with practiced hands. No one had asked him to repair it. No work order had ever been submitted. Still, he believed that if someone carrying a heavy heart chose this bench tomorrow, it deserved to welcome them without wobbling. His late wife had once told him, "The world becomes gentler when people fix the things no one notices." Since losing her, Daniel had carried those words like a compass. As the first rays of sunlight reached the water, footsteps echoed behind him. "Dad." Lily came running with the carefree energy only children possessed. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders, and a bright yellow raincoat made her impossible to miss. "You started without me. I only fixed one bench." She folded her arms dramatically. "You promised breakfast first." Daniel laughed, pretending to surrender. "I stand corrected." They settled onto the bench, unwrapping their sandwiches while ducks glided peacefully across the pond. Lily leaned against her father. "Do you ever get lonely?" The question arrived so softly that it blended into the breeze. Daniel looked toward the water before answering. "Sometimes." "I do too." His heart tightened. "But then I remember Mom said lonely days don't stay forever." Daniel smiled gently. She was usually right. Lily nodded with complete confidence. "So one day we'll have someone else to eat breakfast with." Daniel brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "Maybe." Neither of them noticed the black luxury sedan slowing near the park entrance. Inside sat Eleanor Ashford. At 43, she had become one of the city's most respected philanthropists and the quiet owner of Ashford Holdings, a company built alongside her late husband over 2 decades. Newspapers admired her elegance. Business magazines praised her leadership. None of them wrote about the silence waiting for her every evening. 3 years earlier, she had lost the love of her life to a sudden illness. Since then, every room in her grand estate had felt too large. Every celebration had echoed. Every success had arrived with no one beside her to share it. Her assistant glanced toward the day's schedule. "The board meeting begins in 40 minutes. Eleanor barely looked at the tablet. "Cancel the morning." The assistant blinked. "All of it?" "Yes." Without another explanation, Eleanor stepped out of the car. She wanted air. Not another speech. Not another polished smile. Just 1 hour where no one expected anything from her. She wandered through Maplewood Park, listening to birds hidden among the branches and watching the sunlight dance across puddles left by the rain. The ordinary beauty of the morning felt strangely unfamiliar. It had been years since she had simply walked. As she rounded the bend near the pond, her attention settled on the father and daughter sharing breakfast. Their laughter drifted across the water with effortless warmth. Lily was enthusiastically explaining why ducks probably held secret meetings after sunset. Daniel listened with complete seriousness, as though discussing an important scientific discovery. A smile appeared on Eleanor's face before she realized it. There were many empty benches nearby. Yet something about this quiet little family drew her closer. Not because they seemed extraordinary. Because they seemed real. No photographers. No business partners. No carefully rehearsed conversations. Only genuine affection. For reasons she couldn't explain, Eleanor slowed her steps. Daniel looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment. He saw a woman carrying invisible sorrow. She saw a man who wore quiet strength without asking anyone to notice. For a heartbeat, the rest of the park disappeared. Eleanor hesitated, suddenly feeling like a stranger in her own city. Then, gathering unexpected courage, she asked the simplest question she had spoken in years. "Can I sit with you?" Daniel glanced at Lily. Without hesitation, the little girl scooted closer to her father, creating space on the old wooden bench. "There is always room," Daniel said with a warm smile. Eleanor sat beside them, unaware that the man who had just welcomed her into his peaceful morning had already changed her life many times before. For months, anonymous repairs had appeared at the memorial garden dedicated to her late husband. Broken lanterns had been restored. Wilted flower beds had quietly bloomed again. Weathered benches had been strengthened. She had never discovered who had been protecting those precious memories. As the gentle breeze stirred the willow branches overhead, Destiny smiled in silence. The answer was sitting only inches away. The morning that began with a single question quietly became a tradition. Every Friday, just as the first rays of sunlight painted the surface of the pond with soft shades of gold, Eleanor found herself returning to the same weathered bench beneath the willow tree. She never announced her arrival. Somehow, she always appeared just as Daniel and Lily unfolded their simple breakfast. At first, the conversations remained light. Lily eagerly shared stories about school, her favorite books, and the tiny sparrow she insisted recognized her every morning. Daniel listened with patient smiles, occasionally adding a gentle remark that made his daughter laugh even harder. Eleanor simply listened. It had been years since she had heard laughter that carried no hidden expectations. No one asked about company profits. No one mentioned investments or charity galas. The silence between conversations felt peaceful rather than uncomfortable. For the first time since losing her husband, Eleanor realized how exhausting it had become to constantly play the role of Mrs. Ashford. Here, on an old wooden bench, she was simply Eleanor. One crisp autumn morning, Lily carefully handed Eleanor a folded sheet of paper. "I made something for you." Eleanor unfolded it with surprising caution. Inside was a colorful drawing of 3 people sitting beneath a large willow tree. Above them, written in slightly uneven handwriting, were the words, "Friends make sad mornings brighter." For several long seconds, Eleanor couldn't speak. Her eyes shimmered as she gently traced the letters with her fingertips. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Lily smiled proudly. "I wanted you to have it for your office." Daniel noticed the emotion quietly settling across Eleanor's face. "She puts her whole heart into everything she makes." "So do you," Eleanor replied softly. Daniel looked away, slightly embarrassed by the compliment. He wasn't accustomed to being noticed. After breakfast, Daniel returned to work. His maintenance route carried him through older neighborhoods where forgotten buildings quietly waited for repairs. He tightened loose railings, repainted faded park signs, and replaced broken flower boxes outside the community library. Every task was completed with the same quiet care. People often thanked him. He simply smiled and continued working. Later that afternoon, his route passed a secluded memorial garden overlooking a peaceful lake. Most visitors assumed the city maintained it. Very few knew it had been built in memory of Jonathan Ashford, Eleanor's late husband. Daniel never knew whose memorial it was. Months earlier, he had noticed cracked stone edging, broken lanterns, and neglected flower beds. Since then, he had quietly returned after work whenever he could. That afternoon, he replaced another damaged lantern and planted fresh white lilies near the entrance. When he finished, he placed his tools back into the bicycle basket and rode away without leaving a name. High above the garden, hidden behind the windows of a nearby estate, Eleanor watched from her study. She had come home early after another draining board meeting. Her groundskeeper entered moments later. The gentleman came back. Eleanor looked toward the garden. He repaired another lantern. He refused payment again. A gentle smile appeared on her face. "He doesn't even know this place belongs to me." "No, ma'am." "And yet, he keeps caring for it." The realization settled deeply within her heart. Daniel wasn't helping because someone important might notice. He helped because kindness had become part of who he was. Days passed. Their friendship slowly deepened. Daniel still knew nothing about Eleanor's extraordinary wealth. Whenever she asked about his life, he answered honestly. He spoke about Lily with quiet pride. He admitted that raising a child alone often felt overwhelming. Some evenings, after Lily had fallen asleep, the house seemed unbearably quiet. But every morning, Daniel said one Friday, watching the sunrise, "She reminds me there's still something beautiful waiting." Eleanor understood those words better than she admitted. She too had learned that grief never truly disappeared. It simply became lighter whenever someone chose to share the weight. Meanwhile, across the city, whispers had quietly begun. Inside the towering headquarters of Ashford Holdings, several executives gathered around a polished conference table. One newspaper lay open before them. A blurry photograph showed Eleanor sitting beside an unknown man and a young girl in Maplewood Park. The headline asked only one question: who is the mystery companion of Eleanor Ashford? The room grew silent. One board member adjusted his glasses. This could attract unnecessary attention. Another spoke more cautiously. Reporters have started asking questions. An older investor frowned. We cannot allow speculation to affect the company's reputation. Eleanor calmly folded the newspaper. He is a friend. Do you know his background? I know his character. The room exchanged uncertain glances. Someone quietly suggested hiring investigators. Eleanor's expression immediately hardened. That won't be necessary. No one argued further. But concern lingered behind every polite smile. That evening, Daniel tucked Lily into bed. Dad? Yes. Do you think Eleanor gets lonely after she goes home? The question surprised him. Why do you ask? Because sometimes she smiles with her eyes. Lily paused. But sometimes she smiles with only her mouth. Daniel remained silent. Children notice truths adults often overlooked. I think, he finally answered, she's been carrying something heavy for a long time. Lily reached for her stuffed rabbit. Then maybe we help carry it. Daniel kissed her forehead. I think we're already trying. Far away, Eleanor stood alone beside the window of her quiet estate. On her desk rested Lily's drawing. Beside it stood a framed photograph of her late husband. She looked from one to the other. For the first time in years, the silence inside the house felt slightly different. Not empty. Hopeful. She didn't yet realize that the peaceful mornings she had come to treasure were about to face their greatest test. Beyond the warmth of friendship, hidden truths were beginning to awaken. And when those truths finally reached the light, they would ask every heart involved a difficult question. Would love remain as steady as kindness, even after the world discovered who Eleanor Ashford truly was? The first frost arrived without warning. A delicate layer of white covered the grass in Maplewood Park, turning every leaf into a tiny piece of crystal beneath the early morning light. The familiar bench beneath the willow tree waited in silence, just as it had every Friday for months. Daniel arrived first, carrying 2 paper cups of hot chocolate instead of sandwiches. Lily had caught a seasonal cold and was resting at home with Daniel's elderly neighbor, who insisted she would recover more quickly if her father didn't worry every minute. For the first time in months, Daniel sat alone. A few minutes later, Eleanor appeared, wrapped in a simple cream-colored coat. She noticed the empty space beside him. "Where's my favorite storyteller?" she asked gently. "Lily's at home today. Nothing serious." Relief softened Eleanor's expression. "I'm glad." She accepted the warm cup Daniel offered her. "You remembered." "I remembered you always say mornings feel colder after the first frost." She smiled. "I did say that. And I listen." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence no longer belonged to strangers. It belonged to 2 people who had quietly become important in each other's lives. Across the city, however, silence had been replaced by whispers. The newspaper photograph had spread across television programs and social media. Reporters searched for the identity of the ordinary man who seemed to occupy the attention of one of the country's wealthiest women. Some stories praised Eleanor for embracing a quieter life. Others questioned Daniel's intentions without knowing a single fact about him. At Ashford Holdings, pressure mounted. One influential board member placed another folder before Eleanor. "Our investors are concerned." She remained calm. About what? The perception. Perception isn't truth. No, he admitted. But perception influences trust. Another executive spoke carefully. Perhaps, until things settle down, it would be wise to distance yourself. Eleanor closed the folder without reading another page. I built this company on integrity. She stood. I won't abandon a good man simply because strangers enjoy creating stories. The room fell silent. Yet outside those polished walls, the rumors continued to grow. A week later, Daniel was assigned to repair lighting near the city's historic cultural center. As he worked atop a small ladder, two contractors nearby spoke carelessly, assuming he wasn't listening. So that's him. The one everyone's talking about? Apparently. I heard he's getting close to the billionaire widow. Another laughed. Who wouldn't? One smile from her could change anyone's life. Daniel froze. Billionaire widow? His hands slowly lowered the wrench. The conversation continued. They say she's Eleanor Ashford. The Ashford Holdings owner? Exactly. Daniel's heartbeat became strangely heavy. Eleanor Ashford. The name settled into place like the final piece of an impossible puzzle. Suddenly, countless small details made sense. The elegant car. The occasional security vehicle waiting in the distance. The quiet confidence she carried without ever speaking about herself. She had known all along. He had not. The following Friday, Daniel didn't go to the park. Neither did the Friday after that. The old bench remained empty beneath the willow tree. Eleanor waited until the morning sunlight faded. Then she quietly walked home alone. By the third week, even the ducks seemed to search the shoreline for the familiar father and daughter. Lily noticed the absence too. Dad. I'm listening. Did we do something wrong? Daniel knelt beside her. No. Then why don't we see Eleanor anymore? He searched for words gentle enough for a child's heart. Sometimes, people live in worlds that are very different. Lily frowned. But she liked our world. Those simple words stayed with Daniel long after she had gone to sleep. Unable to bear the uncertainty, Eleanor finally visited Maplewood Park one quiet afternoon. Instead of Daniel, she found Mr. Harris, the elderly gardener who often chatted with everyone passing through. You've been looking for someone, he observed kindly. She nodded. I have. He hesitated. I saw Daniel a few days ago. Is he all right? He looked disappointed. Her heart tightened. Did he say why? Mr. Harris sighed. He only said some friendships become difficult when people discover the whole truth. Eleanor understood immediately. He knew. That evening, Eleanor stood alone inside the memorial garden where Daniel had quietly repaired lanterns and planted flowers for months without ever asking who owned the place. Everything around her reflected his kindness. Fresh white lilies swayed gently in the cold breeze. Every restored bench stood strong against the coming winter. He had cared for this place because someone once loved it, not because he expected gratitude. Tears blurred her vision. She realized she had never truly hidden her identity to deceive him. She had simply treasured the rare feeling of being known as Eleanor instead of Mrs. Ashford. Yet her silence had still created distance. Days later, a fierce winter storm swept across the city. Power failed in several neighborhoods. Emergency crews worked through the freezing rain as strong winds rattled windows and sent tree branches crashing onto empty streets. The old community center near the river had suffered structural damage. Several staff members were stranded inside until help arrived. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed his work gear and drove toward the building. Inside the community center, frightened employees waited together, hoping the storm would pass. Daniel remained calm. He organized everyone, helped them move safely into the strongest section of the building, and worked alongside emergency responders until every person was safely outside. By sunrise, local reporters had already gathered. Among those watching the coverage from her office was Eleanor. The television showed Daniel speaking briefly before walking away from the cameras. I only did what anyone should do, he said quietly. No speeches. No search for recognition. just the same humble kindness she had witnessed from the very beginning. At that moment, Eleanor made a decision. She would no longer allow silence, misunderstanding, or public opinion to decide their future. If there was still a chance to reach Daniel's heart, she would cross every distance between their worlds herself. And somewhere beyond the storm clouds, the first pale rays of dawn broke through, promising that even the longest winter could not prevent the arrival of spring. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the city. Broken branches lined quiet streets, and workers moved patiently from neighborhood to neighborhood, restoring what nature had unsettled. News reports praised the emergency crews who had worked through the night. Among the many names mentioned, one appeared only briefly: Daniel Carter. He had declined every interview after ensuring the community center's staff reached home safely. By the following morning, he had returned to work as though nothing extraordinary had happened. That quiet humility touched Eleanor more deeply than any headline ever could. Standing in her office, she looked across the skyline that had once symbolized achievement. Now it simply reminded her how easily people could become separated by invisible walls. She picked up her phone. "Please arrange this afternoon's charity ceremony exactly as planned," she told her assistant. "And one more thing." "Yes, Mrs. Ashford? I'll be changing the closing speech." Daniel had no intention of attending the ceremony. Large public events were not part of his life. He preferred repairing playgrounds to standing beneath chandeliers. But Lily had another idea. "They're honoring people who helped during the storm," she said excitedly. "You helped. I wasn't looking for recognition." "I know." She smiled. "But maybe someone else needs to thank you." Unable to refuse his daughter, Daniel borrowed a clean suit from an old friend. It wasn't expensive. The sleeves were slightly too long. Lily insisted he looked perfect anyway. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath warm lights. Business leaders, journalists, volunteers, and community members filled every seat. Eleanor stood backstage, holding a carefully prepared speech. After a long moment, she quietly folded the pages. Those words belonged to the businesswoman. Today she wanted to speak as a woman whose heart had finally found its way home. When her name was announced, the audience rose in respectful applause. She thanked the volunteers, emergency responders, and city officials. Then she paused. "There is one person," she said gently, "whose name has rarely appeared in newspapers." The room became silent. He repaired benches no one noticed. He planted flowers no one asked for. He restored a memorial garden without ever knowing who it belonged to. Daniel slowly lifted his eyes. Eleanor looked directly at him. "For months, he protected the memories of the man I once loved." Emotion softened her voice. He expected nothing. He asked for nothing. He simply believed kindness should exist, even when nobody was watching. The audience turned toward Daniel. He looked completely overwhelmed. Eleanor stepped down from the stage. Every camera followed her. Every conversation stopped. She walked across the ballroom until only a few steps separated them. Months earlier, beneath a willow tree, she had asked one simple question. With a tender smile, she asked it again. "Can I sit with you?" A volunteer quietly placed a small wooden bench at the front of the stage as part of the ceremony's park restoration display. Daniel smiled through misted eyes. "There has always been room." She sat beside him. Not beside a maintenance worker. Not beside a wealthy widow. Simply beside the person who had taught her that love often arrived disguised as ordinary kindness. The ballroom erupted into warm applause. Yet neither of them noticed. For the first time in years, the world around them seemed wonderfully quiet. Months passed. Spring returned to Maplewood Park. The willow tree wore fresh green leaves, and the pond sparkled beneath gentle sunlight. The familiar bench remained exactly where it had always been. Only now, 3 people shared breakfast there every Friday morning. Lily laughed while telling impossible stories about ducks opening bakeries and squirrels becoming school principals. Daniel laughed with her. So did Eleanor. There were still busy days. There were still difficult moments. But neither of them carried life's burdens alone anymore. Ashford Holdings quietly expanded its community projects under Eleanor's leadership. Daniel accepted a new position overseeing neighborhood restoration programs, not because of influence, but because his years of quiet service had earned genuine respect. He remained exactly the same man. The only difference was that someone now walked beside him. One warm afternoon, Lily slipped her hands into theirs as they strolled through the park. She looked up with a thoughtful smile. "Remember the first day?" Eleanor nodded. "I remember every moment. I knew you'd come back." Daniel chuckled. "How could you know that?" Lily looked from one to the other. "Because people who make each other smile always find their way back." Neither adult replied. They didn't need to. The answer was already there, in the gentle breeze, in the laughter echoing across the pond, and in the old wooden bench where one small question had quietly changed 3 lives forever. Sometimes, the greatest love stories do not begin with grand declarations. Sometimes, they begin with a tired heart, a simple act of kindness, and 5 unforgettable words.